So first of all, let me say welcome, everybody. You are at a PLMA Load Management Dialogue, and here we hope you'll discover practitioner perspectives on flexible load management, demand response, distributed energy resources, and managed charging. Today's webinar is a discussion with a 2025 PLMA Award winner of excellence, and that is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, also known as SMUD, and DNV, on their initiative, which is called a Telematics-based residential managed EV charging program. And so this is a really timely and important topic. We are really excited to have this conversation today. And I am now going to turn the floor over to Michael Olson of Tallahassee Utilities. He's one of the co-chairs of PLMA's awards group. And I will invite Michael to introduce our speakers and get us started. So welcome, everybody. We hope you enjoy this discussion. It's going to be a really good one. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy, and welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers from SMUD and DNV to set the stage for today's webinar. They're Misty Mercich and Deepak Aswani of SMUD and Chelsea Little of DNV. Before we get started, just a quick note about PLMA Awards of Excellence program and some changes we made this past year. So in the past, there were specific categories to apply under, and we scored nominations against certain criteria under each of these categories. This year, though, we left the process a bit more open, allowing members to define what excellence means to them and specifically their programs. This new format generated over 20 nominations, from which 9 finalists were selected, and the finalist nominations were ranked by a jury of PLMA peers. The SMUD DNV Telematics-based residential managed EV charging program that we'll be hearing from today was one of 4 winning initiatives recognized with an award of excellence at PLMA's spring conference in Kansas City this past May. As we proceed with today's conversation, please type your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer all of them. And now it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to Deepak to get us started. Deepak?
Thank you, Michael. So before we get into our managed charging program, I'd like to share a little bit about Sacramento Municipal Utility District. So we're a community-owned utility in Northern California that primarily serves Sacramento County. We have a little over 600,000 customers and are the 6th largest community-owned utility in the U.S. One unique aspect to note about SMUD is that our board set a goal to decarbonize our energy supply by 2030, and we're aggressively working toward that goal as we speak. Next. So one thing you hear about a lot with managed EV charging is why it's important to mitigate some of the grid impacts of managed EV charging. So your typical EV charging at level 2 rate might be 6 to 10 kilowatts, and that exceeds your typical individual home load when you have, it's a hot summer month when you have your air conditioning running. That impact on the grid starts at the home. So you buying your first EV, your second EV, your neighbor buying an EV, pretty soon you have 3, 4 EVs on a common neighborhood service transformer, and that can lead to an overload. Next. Actually, could you go back? I think the animation didn't work. So when with that impact starts at the service transformer. As adoption continues to grow, that clustered impact starts to go upstream in the grid. It starts impacting your distribution feeders, impacts your distribution substations. Next. So why does this grid impact matter? So when you have overloads on infrastructure, that means that you have to upgrade or replace that infrastructure preemptively. And that has a capital spend impact for the utility. That's counter to the downward rate pressure you have from electrification. I see there was a note that maybe the slides are not advancing. I don't know if others are seeing that. Kind of message that in the chat maybe that.
Yeah. Deepak, they're advancing for me.
Yeah.
They are, okay. So maybe it's a Teams issue. So that infrastructure cost is counter to some of the electrification downward pressure on rates you have. Also, there's a customer experience impact from that infrastructure overload. So specifically, if you're having to upgrade that infrastructure, that means that maybe you're not able to install that level 2 charger as quickly, and you're not on the road as you hoped with charging your EV and driving. So vehicle grid integration approaches such as EV time of use rates or managed charging, they're attempts to mitigate some of the economic and customer experience impacts of EV charging. Next. So a little bit about our pilot. So we had a telematics-based managed charging pilot with 2 aggregators. First was OVGIP, now ChargeScape, then managed Ford, BMW, and GM vehicles. The second was OptiWatt, who managed Tesla vehicles in the program. And the incentive for this program for customers was $150 at sign-up with $20 per quarter ongoing. We have about 1,200 EVs enrolled to date. They're split up almost equally between ChargeScape and OptiWatt, and the enrollment was capped at 2,000 EVs. So in an earlier slide, I talked about one of the benefits of managed charging being mitigating the impact on distribution infrastructure, your service transformers, feeders, and substations. There are also other aspects we were interested in learning about from our pilot. One is the customer experience. How did they feel about managed charging? Was it convenient? Were their charging needs met? Also, whether we're able to use managed charging to consume excess solar. This is particularly a challenge in California, where in spring and fall months, we have excess solar generation. We're starting to see negative market prices in the daytime. And how effective can EVs be at absorbing that negative priced energy? And lastly, as in traditional demand response, how effectively are we able to reduce the system peak for that resource adequacy benefit? Next. So on that bottom slide, one thing I'll point out is for those use cases we talked about, at the time we were planning this pilot for SMUD, our utility DERMS, the primary use case and capability of the utility DERMS is focused on dynamic pricing. And that was the mechanism we used for delivering the use cases we talked about for this pilot. For the pricing, we had an engine that took into consideration a number of inputs. And you see that on the left over here with the arrows feeding into it. I'll call out that the distribution constraints portion was how we accommodated the prevention of the overload of distribution infrastructure. So what we had done is we staggered discount periods of pricing at a local level. And what that allowed us to do was to prevent the timer peak from coincident EV charging at that local infrastructure. That pricing engine offered pricing via an API to the aggregators, OptiWatt and ChargeScape, which in turn communicated with the different OEM servers to manage charging with the vehicle. So via telematics to control when the charging starts and stops. Next. And I could go next again. And now I'll hand it to Chelsea to talk about some of the technical details for the experiment design and evaluation.
Great, thanks, Deepak. I am going to start out with kind of a little bit of a review of some of the stuff that Deepak talked about, and then go into the specific simulations methods we used for this particular project, and then talk about the results of that on the transformer side. So just starting out reviewing the problem that folks on this call are probably very familiar with. If you have everybody comes home right after work during system load peak and plugs in, then you are going to have a lot of load on that transformer and on that grid all at the same time, and you're going to have some overloads of transformers. So next slide. The ideal thing here would be if we could spread that load out, right, over all those lower load hours. But in order to move load effectively, we think of these charging schedules and this managed charging having 3 features. One is that it needs to be automated, so you can't, people are not going to be going out and like changing when their vehicle is charging every day, especially at like 3 a.m. It needs to be dynamic because the grid changes day to day and season to season. In Sacramento, spring loads are really different than fall loads. So it needs to be able to change. The signal needs to be able to change. And it needs to be diversified, right? Not everybody can get the same managed charging time, or you'll just have a timer peak at a different time. So next slide. So SMUD's pilot approach, like Deepak talked about, was to send a price signal for charging optimization. So this graph is a graph of an example day of that price signal. So you can see it's high during that afternoon peak time, and this is a noon to noon graph, and then it's low from this one is from 3 to 6 a.m. So this charging schedule is automated because the price signal, it goes from SMUD to the managed charging OEMs or implementers, and then they send it to the vehicle. So the owner is not involved, and it's dynamic. So SMUD can change this price signal however they want. Next slide. And the other feature of this pilot was that different vehicles received different price signals on any given day. So you can see these are the 4 different price signals that in this pilot we experimented with. So on a single day, a quarter of the vehicles would get each of these different price signals. You can see that low price period when we would hope the most charging happened is staggered to ideally stagger that charge time. So that's like diversification of when that load is going to happen. So allowing shared infrastructure and spreading of that load. Next slide. So optimally with these low price periods, and these are 3-hour low price periods starting from midnight to 3 and then staggering every hour through the night, you can see that like car 1, if it's on that dark blue signal, it would optimally charge from midnight to 3 a.m. and the same for the other cars. Next. And then when you stack all of those up, what you get is this vehicle load shape that ramps up and then ramps down during those like low price nighttime hours when folks should be home and their vehicles should be able to charge at different times. Next slide. So this is what we actually saw when in the real world when these signals were sent to program implementers and then to the vehicles. So you can see that dark blue bar chart. That is the actual average results over every car every day receiving that midnight to 3 a.m. low price signal. And you can see like this is probably what we would hope to happen, right? Like most of the charging happens during those 3 low price hours, and then it ramps off, like not very much after that. But we can see that those other low price periods had a little bit lower compliance with charging during those exact 3 hours, a little bit less optimally. And you can see that kind of like decreases and decreases as you get to later hours during the nighttime period. And that last period is from 3 to 6 a.m. And what you'll notice is we have this midnight increase in every group. And so part of this design of this pilot was in addition to having folks in a treatment group, we also had a control group, so it's like a randomized control trial. The control group doesn't receive any signal and is just like what would have happened had there been no program. And that's the baseline for our evaluation. So in the next slide, you can see that bottom graph is the control group. And you can see in that bottom graph, so the baseline for this evaluation, you get that really big peak at midnight and then it ramps off. And that's because in SMUD territory, there is an EV charging rebate. So if all of your charging between midnight and 6 a.m., you get a little rebate on those kWh used. And so folks have all set their vehicles to start charging at midnight. And so there's definitely some work to be done if this approach were to be continued to try to move folks off of that default midnight start charging. So far what we've talked about is kind of compliance at the large program, every vehicle scale with this, with the price signals. And this also reflects kind of the results on the system. So in the next slide, we can see the combination of all 4 of those groups in that dark blue. So this is like the whole treatment group together. So at the system level, this is kind of the ramping up and ramping down of the EV, total EV load shape that you would see. But of course, we're also interested in how this would look for individual transformers, which might have, you know, 1 to many EVs on them. And so next, I'm going to talk about how we evaluated the benefits of the program as it existed. So as it was implemented, not as a perfect program, but as it was implemented on transformers. And the baseline we used for evaluating transformer impacts was this like control group, the red load shape you'll see. And so the baseline is with this EV rate, midnight to 6 a.m. And people have already moved off of that afternoon peak load times. So next slide. So thinking about transformers, and we also modeled feeders and substations in the study. So the goal was to determine, as we just discussed, how much the program would reduce the number of overload transformers and the associated cost savings with reducing transformer overloads. So like Deepak was talking about earlier, you think about when you think about a transformer, the typical kVA per household on a transformer that we plan for is like 5 kVA, and a level 2 charger is about 7 kVA. So it doesn't take very many level 2 chargers before you could really exceed what the plan for a transformer is. But the problem is that we can't assess EV charging like other grid loads in how the probability that it's going to overload a transformer. So if we go to the next slide, we can think about a traditional grid load of how we might calculate what the probability of a transformer overloading. So this is like say we're doing air conditioners or heat pumps, and we can say, okay, the average load for every hour is a pretty predictable function of temperature, especially when we have multiple hours combined. We can say, okay, it's a function, like for any hour, it's probably a linear function, mostly, of temperature. So we can say we would predict it's this value. And then we can say that the unexplained variation, the variation around that predicted value that doesn't have to do with temperature, follows a pretty normal distribution. Not exactly, but pretty normal. And so we can say, okay, given that we have a normal distribution around a predicted value that varies smoothly, we can say, okay, if the transformer overload value is this, we can say how much of that normal distribution is above that certain value, and that is the probability of exceeding that transformer capacity. With EVs, next slide, it's really different. This is what EV load shapes look like, right? So for any given EV, the day that you're going to plug it in is going to vary. The time that you're going to plug it in is going to vary. And then over different households on a transformer, those things are going to vary even more. Different households plug in at different times. Their level of load is going to be different. So you can see we have some level 1, some level 2 here at like about the 7.5 that you would think. And then we have some that are closer to 10. And then we have these peaks. And there's not like a smooth ramp up. There's no like continuous variable that you can use to predict hourly load. And there's no normal distribution around that predicted hourly load. It's like really stepwise increments of load that you're adding. And so this doesn't fit in a traditional way of saying, oh, if like we have a 90% chance of going over this load. So the alternative way that we determined the probability of transformer overload was to do a simulation. So next slide. So a simulation essentially takes what the actually observed data and takes many draws of the actually observed data. And if you draw from the actually observed data 100 times and one time you overload your transformer, you have a 1% of overload. So that's kind of baseline how simulation works. In this case, we were simulating starting out with randomly assigning EVs to customer households. So we said, okay, in a future 2030 state, we'll have 288,000 EVs. We'll assign those all to SMUD households. Then we will allocate EV attributes, so level 1 or level 2 charger, what model of vehicle it is. And then we will say, okay, we now have 2 vehicles on this transformer, and we show that that transformer's lowest observed load is from 3 to 6. So we'll have one of those vehicles receive the low price 3 to 6 a.m. signal, and one receive the 2 to 5 signal. So we've assigned them low price windows. And then we will, for this particular simulation, grab one of those observed load shapes from a vehicle in real life that received that low price signal. Then we will add those observed vehicle load shapes to the transformer load for every transformer across the whole grid. And we'll see whether in this simulation that each of those transformers was overloaded. And then we repeat that 1,000 times. So for every transformer, you have a probability that that transformer will be overloaded if this program had happened. So, 100 out of 1,000 times, that's a 10% probability that transformer would be overloaded if the program were happened. We also did this simulation with no program. So we could then compare program and no program probability of transformer overloads. Next slide. So this is a visualization of assigning that EV load to an actual transformer overload. This is just a toy example with one EV on a transformer. So that upper graph is a transformer peak day load shape. And then that lower graph is an actual EV load shape, example EV load shape added to that transformer load shape. And that red line shows the capacity of that transformer. So you can see that capacity was exceeded during 1 hour in this toy example. And then on the right side, you can see the criteria we used in order to determine whether an actual transformer overload occurred. So you need 140% over that capacity for 1 hour to overload, et cetera. So those were our criteria for saying overload or no overload. Okay, next slide. And then, of course, do that 1,000 times, and you see the probability that that transformer is overloaded. Next slide. Okay, so coming to our results. So we started out doing these simulations for just 1 day, looking at the peak day of the year. But then we realized that we actually want to know the probability of transformer overload like in a whole year. So we ended up modeling 365 days of doing 1,000 simulations for 288,000 EVs for the whole SMUD population of transformers. And then in that third column, you can see the percent of transformers with more than a 5% probability chance of overload without the program and with the program. So 0% program participation and 100% program participation. Yep, looking at those bottom 2 rows. So greater than 5% probability is 34% versus 30%. So 4% of those transformers were not overloaded with the program versus, or a change of 4%. And then if you look with that 50% chance of overload, the difference is about 2% between program and no program. Next slide. And this is just visualizing that. So we can just focus on that right side graph here. So if there's 0% program participation, then your kind of expected percentage of transformers overloaded is around 10, 11%. And with 100% probability or 100% people participating in the program, that goes down to about 9% of transformers that you would expect to overload. Next slide. And then this just shows the timing of those overloads during the day and compares a smaller transformer to a larger transformer. So that top row is 15 kVA transformer, and each of the columns is adding from left to right, is adding more and more EVs. So if we focus on the top right graph, we can see, okay, so this small transformer with this most EVs with the program. So those blue lines are with the program, number of overloads with the program, and the green bars are without the program. And so you can see that during the middle of the day, the program reduced overloads on those smaller transformers. And then for that midnight peak, the program really reduced number of overloads on those smaller transformers. But because the program shifted that midnight peak to later nighttime hours, the later nighttime overloads actually increased a little bit on those really small transformers because they're a lot closer to that capacity value. And then that second row is for the larger transformers. And you can see for the larger transformers, most of the program's benefit is during those actual peak hours. So that's 12 noon to 6 p.m. is when that real reduction is. And this is the hour that the overload period started, because remember we had 4 hours. So this is actually over 4 hours starting in those times, which is why it's shifted a little bit before that daily peak. But that represents benefits to during the daily peak load on those larger transformers. And then less benefits and the midnight to 6 for larger transformers because they have more headspace there. Next slide. Okay, so looking at the financial benefits of the program. So if we looked at we'll just look at the bottom row of this table. So this is a scenario where you had those 288,000 EVs in 2030 on the grid. So the difference in the number of transformers you would have to replace with the program versus without the program, that delta is 681 transformers, which translates to about $13 million annually of avoided replacement costs. And then per EV, that benefit is about $47, $48 of the program, in just reflecting the benefit of not replacing as many transformers every year. And then I do want to note a couple notes of things I note before the end of my slides. So this is just interim results. So we are working to add a couple features to the pilot. So we're actually working to change the time of the low price windows just a little bit to see if we can smooth out the load even more. And we are working to add to that transformer base load the effect of home electrification as well. So that transformer base load will actually go up a little bit with home electrification, and then we add EVs, and so we're likely to have even greater chance of transformer overloads in that case. So I think that's all I have for the pilot results and simulation results. Love to talk to folks offline and excited for questions. I'll pass it over to Misty.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah.
So as part of our pilot, we've had many lessons learned, but here I've highlighted a few that kind of fed into our next steps as we think about scaling this pilot into a full-scale program. First here is our customer experience. So streamlining and automating the processes for customer enrollment, unenrollment, and opting out is essential for the program's success. Our pilot, as many pilots do, we had a lot of manual processes. And so we'll be looking kind of for automation as we continue to scale, because we know at larger EV enrollment rates, we'll need that automation. For customer education, so we learned that we need to provide clear and comprehensive education to our customers, which is critical for their satisfaction and the overall success of the program. Customers need to adjust their behavior or charging schedules, and it's important for them to understand the significance of these changes. We found that we needed to educate customers that they need to just plug in their car when they arrive home every day and get in a habit of doing this. Many customers don't plug in their car every day. They only plug in when they need it. So sending these messages repeatedly to instill this behavior change was something that we needed to do during the pilot, and that we're going to have to adjust as we scale the program. Number 3 here is targeted enrollment. So optimizing local transformer capacity and addressing the need for location-based load management requires the implementation of targeted group charging signals to effectively manage EV load. So as we scale up our new program and scale up our program, we'll be looking at options to target customers in certain locations that have the greatest need on the grid. And we also might consider possible targeted location-based incentives in the future or other things as we consider how to improve the customer experience and target customers that we need enrolled in the program. And number 4 here would be daytime charging. So to successfully shift energy demand towards solar generation, we must address load shifting constraints and establish various strategies that accommodate charging needs during both morning and afternoon hours. So as we scale up, this is also possibly a behavior change thing. We've trained our customers. As you saw, we have our midnight to 6 a.m. EV rate credit for a really long time. Customers are used to charging at night. So as we scale up this program and we need to kind of soak up some of that solar during the day, that'll be a behavior change and some education that we'll have to have for some of our customers. Next slide. So as we think about kind of where we go to transition this from pilot to program, we're currently going through an RFP process and to select a vendor to help us with this new scaled up program. So our primary purpose for the program will be to reduce our distribution infrastructure upgrades while optimizing our residential EV charging for grid support, while also meeting the EV drivers' needs. We understand that customers need their vehicles and they want to be able to use them when they can. So trying to balance both of those things. Our objectives are going to be to utilize managed charging as a demand response resource for distribution impacts, bulk system costs, and avoid curtailment of renewable resources, like I mentioned in our lessons learned there. And then we'll be looking, so our pilot was telematics-based. We'll be looking to expand from eligible telematics-based OEMs and then leveraging also EVSE charger-based kind of to allow for expanded opportunity for customers across our territory to participate. And then, of course, we want to make our customer experience as seamless as possible. We'll also be leveraging our SMUD DERMS to automate this managed charging starting in 2027. This will be one of the first programs that SMUD has where we'll be connecting it to our DERMS systems. And so this will be one of our opportunities to figure out exactly what that means and figure out how that happens. And then as far as marketing and outreach, we will be working on developing strategies for that targeted customer recruitment and outreach based on grid need. And then our goal is to transition our existing pilot participants and then also scale up our program to a little over 55,000 customers. And then as far as performance criteria, so we'll be doing M&V on a yearly basis, and we'll be looking at customer performance metrics, customer satisfaction, our grid impacts, and then all of the annual reporting related to that. And then I've included kind of our enrollment targets here. As you can see, we're looking to have over 58,000 customers enrolled by the year 2030. And with that, I'll pass it over to Deepak.
Thanks, Missy. So I wanted to go into more detail on how we're considering to evolve some of our success criteria for evaluating some of the local benefits of managed charging. So getting into the specifics here, when we're looking at building new distribution infrastructure, whether it's a substation, feeder, or service transformer, we have well-established criteria for where to locate and how to size that equipment. However, when it comes to replacement or upgrade of that equipment, that gets more complicated. So substation transformers and feeders, they each serve many customers. And if there's an unplanned outage of any of that equipment, that means we have thousands of customers being out of power. until you're able to re-divert power or do the repair. And for that equipment, when we do violate any operational criteria, that immediately triggers the planning for an infrastructure upgrade project. So we now are avoiding those scenarios in the future. For both of those cases, when that operational criteria directly triggers a project, that means if you avoid violations of that operational criteria, that leads to deferral of that upgrade project, and that's actually realized a reduction in capital spend. However, for service transformers, it's a little bit different. Next. For service transformers, they each serve quite a few number of customers than substations and feeders. Or your typical residential service transformer might serve 5 to 20 customers each, and probably closer to 10 on average. And for those transformers, you see for the small number of customers, you don't see as much load diversification. They see quite a bit of variability in their overall load. And as such, they're designed in a way to handle that. So when you are seeing an overload or violation of that operational criteria, you may still find that transformer is operating just fine for another 10 or 15 years. As a result, most utilities, including SMUD, do not replace service transformers proactively upon overload. Rather, they continue to be run to failure. That means that avoiding overload of service transformers does not directly translate to a reduction in capital spend. Next. So what our proposal is to think about valuing benefits for service transformers in a different way. Rather than focusing on the overload criteria, focus on how we're impacting the loss of life for the transformer. So what is the real world depreciation of that transformer? That may not be accurate on an individual transformer basis, but when you're talking about a fleet of transformers, say 50,000, 100,000 transformers, that might have some statistical significance on the impact. Now, looking at a specific hypothetical example, suppose that your service transformers are trending at a 50-year useful life, where they're failing after 50 years of being put into service. And after EV adoption, whatever your forecast is, like that 288,000 number you saw by 2030, maybe you're estimating that loss of life rate to trend toward 30 years. Now, if you mitigate that with VGI measures, such as time of use rates or managed EV charging, hypothetically, maybe you're reducing that impact to now being a 40-year useful life. So the benefit of managed charging would be the additional 10 years of life you get out of that service transformer. And that directly translates to a different trajectory for your capital spend forecast. So this particular project is something we're in the process of proposing to EPRI as a supplemental project where other utilities can also participate in. So if this is something you're interested in, please reach out to PLMA for an introduction. We'd be happy to include you in that conversation about pitching and ideating that project. So with that, I will hand it back to Michael.
Okay, great, fantastic. Chelsea, Deepak, Misty, really appreciate the presentation. A number of great questions came in through the chat. Deepak, let me just start with you. So there's a question around SMUD's DERMS program, or Distributed Energy Resource Management System. Is it integrated with the utilities ADMS, Automated Distribution Management System?
Sure. So for the pilot, it was not. I think the pilot was more focused on some of the functionality that was planned in the DERMS, early functionality of dynamic pricing that I mentioned. It was more about understanding if we were able to dispatch in this fashion by the DERMS, what type of value can we expect out of this program, and building the business case for scaling and doing that integration. For the program that Misty talked about, as we make that transition from pilot to program, that one is intended to integrate with our DERMS. But since then, starting this project several years ago, we now have expanded the use cases and capabilities. So I think we're also thinking a little more broadly than just dynamic price integration with these aggregators.
Okay, great. Chelsea, a number of questions came in around the nighttime load shift pilot. If I recall one of the earlier slides, you were looking to enroll about 2,000 vehicles. You had something maybe around 1,500. One of the questions was how many vehicles were basically enrolled in each of the treatment groups, each of the four price signal groups?
Yeah. So I think we had about 1,200 to 1,500, like you said, vehicles enrolled total of everybody who enrolled. And we split those into a control and treatment group. So there ended up being about 800 folks total in the treatment group. So across all four of those time signals. And a complexity that is like one more thing to go into on these slides and for an already complex program is that everyone who was in the treatment group actually cycled through each of the low price signals. And so that way, if the low price signal, like if the load shape associated with one low price signal was different from another, we could be sure it was due to the price signal and not the group that was on that price signal. So, so they were split into, so it was about 800. So about 200 would be on each price signal every night. And then the next night they would move to the next.
Okay, this may lead to the next question. Could you or maybe Deepak kind of reflect on some of the reasons the nighttime load shift results may have deviated from the ideal staggered pattern? Chelsea,
yeah, I can
maybe
start. I think, to be honest, there's a little bit of uncertainty about that still. I think some of it has to do with those, definitely some of it has to do with that people have in SMUD territory, for the most part, have their vehicles programmed to start charging at midnight. And it did seem like there was just some room for improvement on overriding that signal that people had already programmed in their vehicle. So from my perspective, I think that was probably the biggest cause of that, lack of like perfect compliance that we saw.
Sure.
Some of the program implementers did speak a little bit about how they wanted to really make sure that those vehicles were charged by the time people were ready to leave in the morning. And so there was a little bit of concern that maybe that 3 to 6 window charging was possibly not happening exactly as intended, because they were like, we want people to be ready to go at 7, so we need to stop them charging it much earlier than 6.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably something that could be overcome too, because we did end up looking at, from the different OEMs, at histograms of when people had set their vehicles to when they wanted to leave in the morning. It was very uncommon that folks wanted to leave before 6. So from my perspective, it probably has to do mostly with people setting their vehicles to charge at midnight. But Deepak, did you have anything else to add there?
And I think the only other comment on it, that was exactly the answer I was going to share as well. Is I think our hypothesis is that it's the conflict between the dynamic control and whatever was pre-programmed in the vehicle based on the time of use rate, the EV time of use rate. But I think there is awareness of that issue, some awareness, and we're likely to see that improve. I think we're hoping to see that improve over time, because part of it is related to logic in the vehicle and in the cloud. And part of it is also how often is there communication happening between the vehicle and the cloud. So we did see some improvements over the course of the pilot, and I think we're expecting to see that continue to improve over time.
Yeah, and I just am remembering now, it's that we had these discussions and you just realize that It's actually very challenging to communicate with all these vehicles. It's like the vehicle kind of has to power up to a certain degree in order to send a signal. And then if it powers back down, then maybe you can't send a signal to it. And so there's a lot of complexity beyond what we just think of like it being straightforward, like charge when it's low priced. And then of course, folks are also permitted whenever they want to override the control at any time. And so they're not doing that in the middle of the night, but that is another complexity of like, oh, if the vehicle like decides again that it wants to charge at midnight, then is like that an override.
Were participants surveyed to see how many had pre-programmed, going into the pilot?
Participants were surveyed. DNV conducted a survey of participants after about a year of them being in the pilot. And I think that SMUD had maybe also performed a survey before that. I don't remember whether we asked them about whether they had pre-programmed their vehicle, but if folks are interested on that, we can definitely follow up and I can check in our survey results if we asked about
Sounds
that.
good. And Chelsea, while I have you, what was the analytics software you used to run the simulations? What was the analytics platform behind the simulations?
Yeah. This is a DNV proprietary tool that we developed specifically for this project. Yeah, I think it's would be really, really exciting if we could do this somewhere else, just because the conditions and different utilities are different. And I think that we could potentially see a much bigger difference if there wasn't this specific EV rate, right? So the baseline wasn't already pretty far off underlying load peak. But yeah, this is a DNV tool that we've developed, and on the back end, it's built in Python and R.
Sounds good. Thank you. Deepak, I think on one of your slides you reported you found the value per vehicle in terms of avoided distribution costs to be relatively about $40 to $48 per vehicle. Recently, another PLMA utility showed that their value was more on the order of maybe $200 to $300 per vehicle, significantly greater than the findings of your initial pilot. Do you have some thoughts on why that difference might exist, or any insights to that difference?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that's a really important question, because when you see a lot of these studies out there, you see value numbers all across the board. And I think the important thing to consider for some of these local benefit load flexibility programs is that benefit is not based on a single year when you're talking about system level benefits. System level benefits, when you're looking at capacity or energy value, that's based, that's based on hourly basis, or it's basically across a defined window of time. For local benefits, where you're talking about avoiding distribution upgrades, it's a long-term horizon where you're looking out into the future. So you're highly sensitive to the assumptions you're using for how far out are you going and what are those assumptions. So for example, in our simulation, our end year, or the DNV simulation, the end year was 2030, where we were around maybe 20 to 25% of the vehicle population was with EVs. If you look at the Argonne National Lab report that for the BG and WeGrid present analysis and pilot, I think their high adoption scenario was more like 50%, and they were going out to 2035. Also, your baseline has a significant impact as well. So the baseline that we used for our pilot was comparing managed charging to time of use rates, because we have very high uptake of time of use rates in our service area, and that's really the comparison point. While for another utility, like in that Argonne National Lab report I mentioned, I believe the baseline was unmanaged, so without time of use rates. How did managed charging go beyond that?
Great, thank you. Chelsea, any additional thoughts there? Or
I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Misty, want to get a question or two in for you. And unfortunately, my laptop died partly through your presentation, so you may have covered this. Why is your upcoming program both telematics and EVSE, while your pilot was just exclusively telematics?
Yeah, so the pilot was exclusively telematics, and when we were having conversations internally of how we would scale that up, initially we were thinking it would also continue to be exclusively telematics. But as we kind of understood the landscape of the available vehicles that are managed telematically and the different vendor space and kind of the way that we want to integrate with DERMS and kind of get a wide reach, and then also being able to target customers kind of at the distribution level, we realized that if we just did telematics, that would be very limiting in the near future. So we had to kind of also allow for EVSE to enroll also. So that's the way we've set that up. I think originally we were thinking that might be confusing for customers. Are we going through do they have to also worry about setting their EVSE and set their vehicle and all of that? But so we will kind of go through that as we continue to scale up the program and maybe do some report back on how that works. But I know other utilities are facing some of those same questions as they look to scale up.
Great, thanks. While I have you, what EV participation level do you think you need to justify the program? Is there a threshold to move forward?
Yeah, so I think, you saw in some of Chelsea's slides, some of those financial benefits that she listed. So we also kind of looked at those interim results and kind of looked at, the benefits for managed charging and how much money we could save in distribution or transformer upgrades. And kind of balancing that with the number of customers we thought that we could enroll in a realistic manner, like percentage of the total EV population, and how much it would cost to run a program. So that was kind of the that we looked at in determining kind of our enrollment targets.
Great, thanks, Misty. Miss Judy, I see we're running tight on time. Since we got started a little bit late, can I beg one more question?
Definitely.
One more. Okay, great. And this one came in advance. Perhaps Deepak, I'll direct this to you. Does SMUD have a time of use rate as well? And did you all explore the overlap between the two? And if so, how are you valuing the benefits when there is overlap?
Yeah, so I think this relates to the baseline comment earlier that we do have a time of use rate. We have high uptake from it. So for this pilot, it was most relevant to compare managed charging to the time of use rate performance, and that was our control group. However, a while back, this was like a little over 10 years ago, we did do a pilot. It was called the EV Innovators pilot, where we tested different time of use rates with a baseline flat rate. And there the baseline or control group was kind of your traditional volumetric rate. And we got the comparison there. So it really is utility specific what your rate offerings are, what your customer mix is like, to understand what the right baseline to be. And that might be different from one utility to utility.
That makes sense. Thanks, Deepak. Well, as we're coming to the end of time here today, I'd like to sincerely thank each of you for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. It's been a pleasure. Miss Judy, I'll give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much to Deepak and Misty and Chelsea for just a terrific conversation today and for all the good work going on at SMUD and DNV. And we appreciate you sharing that with us and with everybody in the PLMA stakeholder group, which is a lot of good folks. And so let me quickly wrap us up by saying, for everybody who has enjoyed this today, if you would like to pass this information on or listen to it again, PLMA has both a YouTube channel and also a podcast, and this information will be posted there in the next couple of days. Give you an opportunity to listen again if you would like. Next of all, I want to make sure everybody knows that in just 2 weeks from now, we will be in Denver, Colorado for PLMA's third symposium on electric vehicles. So this is a very timely connection with the work that's going on at SMUD Please register today. Here is a link that will get you to registration, or you can go straight to the homepage at PLMA, which is flexload.org. And I might also throw in that if you're trying to get a hotel room, the PLMA discounted rate is valid until tomorrow. So do that today if you can. We have a couple of classes coming up that we encourage you to consider. One is in the end of September, and this will be on wholesale markets. And then we have one in mid-October that will be specifically about the fundamentals of flexible load management. So it will cover a lot of different topics within FlexLoad. You can find more information on the website, and these will both be run online and not in person. So they will be live online, which is also a really dynamic and great way to learn this information. Wanted to also flag that PLMA has a news page where we're posting job opportunities from across the industry, as well as RFPs and RFIs and other announcements. If you are a PLMA stakeholder, you are welcome to go and look at any of those announcements or job opportunities, RFIs, RFPs. And if you are a PLMA member, we invite you to let us know if you have things you would like to post to that page, and we would be happy to do that for you. And last but not least, let me wrap us up today and say thank you to everybody for joining us. You've been listening to a load management dialogue presented by PLMA. To learn about upcoming dialogues, we invite you to visit the PLMA calendar at flexload.org or your favorite podcast platform. And that concludes this edition. So again, have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.